This was the official announcement from Marco Rubio. The scandal exploded in Washington after Marco Rubio went after Cuba, the Cuban state oil company, and put it at the center of the crisis. An agreement that was trying to pave the way for a huge shipment of fuel to leave Florida for Cuba. This Friday, June 12, 2026, the case is already seen as a direct blow to the regime's energy system because it doesn't involve just gasoline and diesel. It involves the port, tanks, trucks, state-owned companies, the supposed private sector, the risk of diversion, and the old structure that controls almost everything on the island. The company Vanguard Energy, based in Coral Gables, wanted to deliver more than 250,000 barrels of diesel and gasoline to private Cuban buyers, using a structure connected to Cuba to store the product. But Rubio upended this plan by sanctioning the state-owned company and accusing the regime of using energy as a political weapon, while the Cuban people face blackouts, lines, and shortages. The problem is simple to understand and hard to accept. How can you send fuel to Cuba without going through the regime itself, which controls the port, storage, trucks, and distribution? How can you believe that the product would reach only the private sector if the physical infrastructure is tied to the Cuban state? What were they trying to do? And why did Brazil react now? I'll tell you all about it in a moment. If you like this kind of straightforward and no-nonsense content, consider subscribing because we have videos like this every day. Marco Rubio announced the sanction against Cuba on June 11, 2026, directly targeting the state company responsible for Cuba's oil and gas infrastructure. The measure blocks the company's assets and interests under American jurisdiction and increases the risk for any U.S. company that tries to do business with it. The decision carries weight because Cuba does not operate in a free market. The Cuban regime uses fuel to protect privileges, maintain security structures, and sustain its control machinery while families face blackouts and shortages. The argument gained traction because the average Cuban waits hours for gasoline, sees businesses come to a halt, and lives with power outages. At the same time, the repressive apparatus keeps functioning. Surveillance agencies remain on the streets, and the regime's elite continues to be protected. The deal that sparked the controversy involves Vanguard Energy, a Florida-based company interested in sending a large shipment of fuel to Cuba. The operation involved more than 250,000 barrels of diesel and gasoline, with the sales slated for private Cuban buyers. On paper, it seemed like support for entrepreneurs. In practice, the shipment would need to enter through a Cuban port, using storage connected to the state system and circulating around the island in tanker trucks. That's where the plan loses credibility. The question that undermines the rosier version of the deal is simple. Who oversees all of this inside Cuba? A company can sign a document, promise control, and say that the product won't be resold to the regime. But after the fuel arrives at the port, goes into the tanks, and leaves by trucks, real oversight becomes almost impossible. In Cuba, a private business owner doesn't easily defy an order from a military authority or security agent. The first critical point is at the port. A tanker ship needs authorization, docking, port services, security fees, and local operations. Matanzas stands out as a key location precisely because it's a strategic hub for fuel. The problem is that this kind of infrastructure is not in the hands of the independent private sector. It's connected to state entities. Even before reaching the supposed private buyer, the regime can already profit from the operation. The second point is storage. A shipment of this size needs tanks, measurement, pumping, and technical control. Cuba is relevant here because it helps control oil and its derivatives on the island. Other organizations like Cymex, Cuba Metais, and Cuba Metals are involved in import and trade, ligadas à importação, comércio e distribuição. If these entities handle the cargo, receive services, or control the flow, the deal stops being just a private sale and becomes a loophole for the Cuban state. The third point is about the tanker trucks. After being stored, the fuel needs to be delivered to the buyer. But Cuba doesn't have a large private fleet available to move hundreds of thousands of barrels without relying on the state. The trucks capable of transporting fuel on a large scale are usually under the direct or indirect control of the regime. Therefore, the final delivery would be vulnerable to diversion. The sheer volume also raises suspicion. Small businesses need diesel and gasoline for delivery, transportation, food generators, and services. That's real. But the Cuban private sector doesn't have full freedom or enough structure to absorb a load of this scale on its own. If there's leftover fuel, who gets it? If there's a lack of oversight, who prevents reselling? If the regime controls the route, who decides the destination? That's where Rubio's sanction hits a sensitive nerve. The Trump administration tries to support the Cuban people and independent entrepreneurs, but without supplying the dictatorship. That line becomes impossible when the operation depends on Cuba. The state company became a target because it symbolizes the meeting point between energy and political control. If the regime needs it to receive fuel, the business is not as independent as it seemed. Havana reacted by attacking Washington and trying to turn the sanction into a punishment against the Cuban people. That response is well known. The regime always blames external factors when its internal structure collapses. But reality weighs against that version. The government controls both the entry and the distribution, and then it blames others, while the people pay the price. For the average Cuban, this means the refrigerator is turned off, businesses are affected, transportation is reduced, and daily routines are disrupted. For the regime, it means political risk. The most troubling detail is that fuel in Cuba can have two destinations. It can power trucks carrying food, ambulances, hospital generators, and aid deliveries. But it can also power patrols, political mobilization buses, police vehicles, and surveillance infrastructure. Rubio is precisely targeting this risk. In a dictatorship, scarce resources rarely get allocated neutrally. Those close to power receive them first. Those who depend on the state have to wait. The humanitarian alternative mentioned in the debate is Caritas and the Catholic Church. This path appears to be the most reliable for delivering fuel for aid trucks, food distribution, and support for poor regions. Rubio tightened the siege because he understood the political moment. The Cuban dictatorship needs fuel, money, and loopholes. The sanction against Cuba closes one of those loopholes at the most sensitive point. It warns that companies from the United States cannot claim to support the private sector to carry out an operation that, on the ground, depends on the Cuban state. Rubio put his finger on the sore spot. The Cuban people need help, but not a model that feeds the same system that left them without electricity, without gasoline, and without freedom. I'm Milson Alves, global internationalist, and my purpose is to keep you well informed with the truth every day. The news links are in the video description. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end, check out the comments so you can be even more engaged with the Milson Alves community.